You're meeting up with a close group of friends. You've known them for years. It's been such an amazing journey that you guys have been on. And it's almost cathartic how well you know these people and how well they seem to know you. Like, all of them have the same things they want to work on, they have the same trauma. They're all on this journey of growth together. And they brought you along. And what they're bringing you along to is growth seminars. These seminars aren't just for anyone either. Like, it's actually quite exclusive and a little expensive. But you put it out, like the money, the time, the effort, because you know it's worth it. You need to change. The leader, the vanguard, he speaks to you. Like, he sees you. Even if you're in a crowd of thousands of people, hundreds of other women around you, he finds the time to look you in the eye and he just knows you. He knows you inside and out. All those issues that nag at you, he'll find them. And you know it's worth it. Like, you would pay $100,000 just for a minute of his time. He's that good. And your friends are so good to you because they're letting you into this exclusive group because they know you need a little bit of extra help to help overcome your trauma. It's almost a little exciting. They're taking you by candlelight into this pitch black room. It's completely dark. Like, you can barely see your hands in front of you. It's that dark. And like, the energy in the room is just vibrating. Like, it's like you're almost in an escape room. Like, you're like, what's gonna happen next? That's when they tell you to put on the blindfold. Kind of a little weird. Like, it's already like you can barely see things, but okay. So you slip on the blindfold. You have nothing to worry about. These are your friends. You have absolute trust and faith in them. They only want what's best for you. That's when they tell you to take off your clothes. Your clothes. Like, I mean, I guess it's fine. Everyone here is a woman. Um, like, there shouldn't be any issue with that. It's still a little strange, though. I guess it's symbolism, right? You're trying to cast off your trauma and enter into a new you. This is a safe space. So you slowly shrug off your clothes. You feel the fibers between your fingertips as you let them fall to the floor. You're standing there, naked, blind. That's when you hear it. It's the shutter of a camera. You can almost feel the lens of the camera pressing into you. It's boring into you. Every naked piece and exposed part of your skin is photographed. Surely they must just be lights. Like, they can't be taking pictures of you. That's when you're grabbed violently. You're strapped to a table. Your arms are bound, your legs are bound. You have your friends, the women that you have trusted, the women who you've been going to class with, the women who you've bared your soul to, and they're holding you down. That's when they bring out a pen that burns your skin. It's so painful. You want to scream, you want to die, but you do it with that smile because it's for the leader. It's for your vanguard, for Keith. It's what you need to be pure, to be an elite part of his circle of women. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast, where we delve into true crime and true events. Today's event, we're going to be discussing NXIVM. I'm your host, Kyra. I'm joined by Jen. We have looked into this case via testimony, court proceedings, victim impact statements, and trustful sources. Anything that we say is our opinion and our opinion only. The case has been resolved, but there's still a lot of unresolved crimes that have gone unpunished, which we'll get into a little bit. So, if I say allegedly, that means it's not proven true quite yet in the court of law. So, if we get any of the information wrong, or if you have any additional insight into the case, let us know in the comments. We love hearing about it. We're going to be discussing some pretty heavy topics in today's case. Some of the content warnings are going to be CP. There's going to be a lot of abuse, SA. There's a lot of like trafficking, underage girls. There's incest. There's a lot in this case. So if you're not in the right mindset for that, go get yourself a tea, take a bath, and we'll see you in the next episode. So NXIVM was an illegal pyramid scheme in which Keith Raniere, and I'll be referring to him as Raniere for the rest of the case, used to recruit women and force them to have contact with him. And when I say contact, it's the sexual kind. At his trial in May 2019, jurors heard an endless slew of lurid testimony, including detailed descriptions of how he had sex with underage girls. He forced 3 women, they were all sisters. He got them all pregnant, and he forced them to get abortions. And there wasn't really any telling of how many times he got them pregnant. I just know it happened multiple times, according to the court proceedings. It took 5 hours of deliberation to find him guilty of sex trafficking, conspiracy to do sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy to commit forced labor, as well as CP and child, what is it called? Pedophilia? Yeah, pedophilia. But how did it get to this? NXIVM is a cult. It was a multi-level marketing company, which was running for almost 2 decades, offering the illusion of self-help. It was founded by Keith Raniere, who is also known as Vanguard within the organization. He created NXIVM in 1998, along with Nancy Salzman, who is known as the Prefect. He created a sorority within NXIVM called DOS. It's an acronym, which we'll get into later, but essentially what it means is Lord or Master of the Obedient Female Companions. The DOS had female slaves owned by masters. And according to the filings in this case, Allison Mack was allegedly the second in command in this group, following Raniere. And before I get into this, I want to explain this as cohesively as possible. Keith Raniere was, and still is, the most evil and sadistic perpetrator in this case. The other women who went to court and served sentences were manipulated, yes. But some of them were almost as rotten to the core as Raniere. In order to understand the full enormity of the disgusting atrocities in this case, it's important that we also know about the women who were in Raniere's inner circle. Those women were Allison Mack, Nancy Salzman, Lauren Salzman, the late Pamela Calfritz, Claire Bronfreman, Rosa Laura Junko. Another person who was involved but wasn't in the inner circle was Danielle Roberts. She was a doctor who assisted the cult.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's important that we mention these names now before we go into further detail on the crimes each individual committed. Some of these women were found guilty, others were acquitted or ran. It's important to remember people are innocent until proven guilty. I'm going to report on what I found based on testimonies of the victims. But in the back of our minds, it's still important to engage our critical thinking and keep in mind these were women who were expertly gaslit by Keith Raniere in this cult. And in some cases, this was the spark that lit their psychotic behavior. And if you want further information on this cult, HBO released a docuseries called The Vow. There's another one released by Stars. It's called Secluded Inside the NXIVM Cult. Since the late 1990s, it's been estimated that 16,000 people have enrolled in courses offered by NXIVM, with participants taking part in workshops, the exclusive success programs. However, authorities didn't make any arrests until 2017. That's 2 decades of just horrible, horrible stuff. And it was all revealed in an expose in the New York Times when it brought to light how members were being enslaved, branded, and subject to harsh corporal punishment. This was a cult that was instilled in a good vibes only belief system. In order for these people who believed in the mission, they manipulated them and took their best desires to make the world a good place and twisted it and told them that it's just because they wanted to be special. Watching the deconstruction process was painful as they were innocent people, or at least most of them were innocent people who were looking for something and who had a greater sense of meaning, and they just wanted order. The group's sales pitch was that Raniere was a genius. He had one of the highest IQ scores in the world. In reality, though, prosecutors have said that he graduated with a 2.26 GPA, real world genius here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Take his L.
Yeah, big L. Many participants took these workshops and moved on from the cult, but on the other side of the spectrum, other people quit their careers and moved to the company's headquarters near Albany, New York, where they were isolated and susceptible to Raniere's influence. The ones who became NXIVM coaches depended on the organization for their income. Some were Mexican immigrants who needed it for their legal status in the USA. And having seen of what happened to critics who were targeted by private investigators and hit with endless lawsuits, it was terrifying to go up against them. Ex-members of the cult knew all too well the manipulative tactics Raniere would use. Classes would cost up to $5,000 for a 5-day workshop. These people would often find themselves in debt for the courses that they felt like they had to take. They were obliged to work for the cult, pay it off. During Raniere's birthday in August, members were expected to pay $2,000 or more and gather in New York to honor him for Vanguard Week. Most NXIVM members never had a sexual relationship with Raniere, but they did face pressure to pay more and more for these classes. One couple estimated they spent $30,100 on NXIVM courses, and they were forced to declare bankruptcy. It was not as easy as it seemed to leave the group. In a pitch to become a slave, women were told they had to provide collateral, which we'll get into more later and what that kind of looked like. But they were often explicit photos confessing stories of them that were quite sinister.
Oh my
The
God.
goal with becoming a slave was to eradicate the weakness inside of you, because women had over emotional natures. I'm going to get into some of these horrifying stories in a moment. And I think it's important that we understand first Raniere's twisted view about women. He told his followers a story. He went to college with a woman and he opened up the doors for her all the time, like all the time. She was so blind to the fact that he was opening them that she thought that the doors were just opening automatically. He said women have been coddled their whole lives. Because of that, they had no understanding of reality whatsoever. And that men, they're the arbiters of reality. They're the reason reality happens. He spoke so much about women and their entitlement. He also said that they misused their sexuality and their body and their figure to gain advantage in the world. And he said men can't do it the same way. Like, men have to work hard. He spoke about them being women, chronic complainers. And I mean, hindsight's 2020 for him,
Yeah.
at least. He would say, do you ever see a woman being accused of something and a group of men are blaming her? No, of course not. It's the other way around. It's one man being blamed by all these women. Women are complainers. They're whining and they're so entitled. Like, they think they should have a bunch of things when reality, they shouldn't have it. And training will fix that entitlement.
Wow.
Raniere was coddled his whole life, starting with his mother, then women in college, and then at Consumers Byline, which we'll get into. That was where he had his first harem. And then, of course, all the followers in NXIVM. He was always coddled, but never required to face the consequences of his own actions. He was always blaming others, and no one ever blamed him. Or if they did, he would sue them. He was truly entitled. Women would be singled out and beaten down. There was a woman called Bubina. That was someone who just wore really tight clothing. And so she was teased for it, for the kind of clothes she wore. If it was too tight fitting, or if they showed too much of their rears or chests, they would be teased
Acid.
a lot for it. And sometimes, as a woman, you can't really help that. Like,
Honestly.
yeah, it's the body you're born with. So, throughout a workshop, some of the men would secretly take pictures of women's cleavage. If a woman was sitting down or if her underwear was showing at all, they would take pictures up their skirts, and so on. They were compiled, these pictures. And it went into a slideshow where it basically compared women to cows.
What the fuck?
Um, yeah. And it was to show the men that women were nothing more than reproductive objects. Their intent was to humiliate these women. So you're probably hearing all this and you're like, why didn't they just leave? Why? Like, obviously, that doesn't sound good. Like, that's not right. With women and people within NXIVM, they exploited them not only by making them have to pay for these ridiculous courses and forcing them to work there to pay it off.
Yeah.
But women specifically would be making little to no money for years. A time when they might be getting a career or an education or building a family, it was spent building the cult. As well as having zero financial freedom, they just plain old didn't have freedom. One woman said that Allison Mack required her to ask for permission for anywhere she wanted to go, for people that she wanted to see. She was required to send Allison her whereabouts on an hourly schedule, as well as her weight. She had to ask permission to eat or drink. Not only this, but women within NXIVM were instructed to write damaging documents against their loved ones and themselves. One woman went on to sue her own mother, as well as they had to collect collateral. And this collateral consisted of diverse things: nude photographs, videos of the slaves, and with all due respect, These people are women, but in order to highlight the horrors of this cult, sometimes they'll be referred to as slaves, and they would make sure that they got close up. One lawyer went on to describe it as vulvas. It was a face and a vulva, or vulvas with faces.
Oh my god, that's...
And that made up a large part of the collateral. There were confessions, either written or videotaped, confessions to crimes or other abhorrent, deviant things, aberrant things, perversions, cheating on spouses, true or untrue. In a lot of cases, these were just blatant lies that they were manipulated and believed into thinking about themselves, like confessions to prostitution or molesting a child.
Wow.
Yeah. They were rattling on their friends in the same fashion too, and their families. They would make videos or letters and stamp them ready to be sent to the authorities. Collateral also consisted of getting financial items, like the deeds to one's houses, car, businesses, and allegedly sometimes even children. For those women Raniere was oppressing, there was an occasion where he gleefully questioned a woman not only if, but when she would commit suicide. Worse still, he went on to express his wish that she would be the first to fall in a cascade of suicide dominoes, followed by other women he was oppressing. And so there went on to be a series of restrictions that Raniere would impose upon the cult. I don't know if you guys have ever heard. Like North Korea has certain hairstyles that you're allowed wearing, certain clothes you're allowed wearing. It's the same here. Raniere imposed starvation diets, and it's really disgusting.
That's awful.
But it was so he could get it up. Even a modicum of fat turned him off. And we'll get into more of this later because it's truly disgusting. But women were put on a restricted calorie diet. They were permitted to limited sleep, so they would time how long you got to sleep. A constant mix of praise and verbal abuse was your everyday. One woman was instructed to be 106 pounds. She needed to lose another 20 pounds.
God.
At this weight, your body can't sustain function. It shuts down all non-essential life functions. Women would lose their periods, threatening their ability to reproduce because they were so thin. All because Raniere wanted them to look like a 12-year-old girl.
Oh my god.
And keep in mind, at the times of these crimes, he was anywhere between 45 to 60 years old. So I have an email that I want to read verbatim to you. And it kind of shows the same way Raniere would manipulate the people who place their trust, their faith, and their love in. I had planned to surprise you on our anniversary, for I had hoped it would make this possible for me by losing weight. I do believe your habits are more important than us. We're nothing if you don't earn your way out of this ethical dilemma. At this point, I don't know if your weight or that you've not written to me as obsessively as you promised. Even if you drank water and walked many miles a day, I do not know if you can create the ethical permission for us to be together on our anniversary. I do not know what to do. Only you can create this, but it has to be more important than every moment in anything. And still, there are no guarantees. On another note relating to this, in thought, I am more faithful to you than you are to me. For example, I have never dreamt of having sex with another woman. Up until recently, you said the people whom you had sex with in your dreams were faceless and genitalless, or with my genitals. This is no longer the case. And I see it's an additional problem. It's a problem because of the things you said and thought about my genitals, amongst other things from the beginning of our relationship. I fear because of dependency. I think you're obsessed in this area. And if so, it's important that you're obsessed with mine. Your dreams indicate otherwise. So basically, what he's saying there is because she was dreaming of, having contact with someone who was probably him. She just didn't imagine the face. He's
Yeah.
saying that he's basically cheating on her or cheating on him, sorry, and that she needs to be more obsessed with him.
Because of a dream. Oh my god.
Yeah. He goes on to say, "You need to prove yourself to me. You must live all your past commitments, ideas of commitments, thoughts of commitments, and anything else you can imagine. There are no limits, no idea, concepts, or practice is too much. This is a start. I do not know if it'll be enough, but you must let this fact not discourage you. Please do this. Make it right. I love you." So, yeah, it's a start. It'll never be enough, but don't let it discourage you. Basically, what he is saying. If you don't fear your master, if you're not committed to reality. Because remember, men are reality. You're lazy, irresponsible, unprincipled. You care more about your body and your feelings more than anything else. You don't care about Keith. Another woman was punished in the cruelest way. She loved her hair. It was beautiful, thick brunette hair. Like, imagine Rapunzel. That was her. Like, she had the most beautiful, glowing hair imaginable. She wore it long since she was 13. Raniere publicly humiliated her and said that she couldn't cut her hair until she fixed her breech. She let her hair grow more than a foot beyond her height, which was 5'3". She suffered from migraines, headaches, pain at all times, and she became ashamed of the locks she once cherished. He also set hair mandates for other women, and he really kind of drove in this BDSM type relationship, the slave and the master relationship. He shunned, chastised, humiliated, penalized, defamed, and swindled women. When he wasn't busy abusing others, he would instruct his close circle of women to do the same. Natalie, a former partner of Raniere, recalled that he insisted that she kept the body of her dead puppy in her garage freezer and looked at it daily.
What the fuck? Oh my god.
He used everything at his disposal to manipulate and torture his victims. In June 2008, one of the survivors of his abuse got a call that would change her life. On the other line, she was being informed that her father was dying. It was thrombosis, I probably mispronounced that, which left him with a few feet of his small intestine. Raniere knew how important her father was and positioned himself to be a savior. He mobilized his community to help. And as a result, the father was transferred to a better hospital within New Mexico City. The father suffered through 3 surgeries, all of them seemingly unsuccessful.
Oh no.
But it was in the hours in the waiting room, the surgeon came out. His head was hanging in his hands, low and shaking. Allegedly, he was quoted as saying, "In all my years of practice, I have never seen this. His tissue has been healed. I think we just witnessed a miracle." Whether it was a miracle or not, it's debatable. But Raniere was quick to take credit for it,
Oh, of course.
which instilled an immense set of debt and gratitude for saving her father's life. But to her surprise, her father passed away a few months later. On every occasion, Keith and his women would remind her when she tried to leave that it was impossible for a man who could perform such miracles to be ill-intended or cause any harm. After all, he healed her father. As a 15-year-old, it's not something that you easily forget. They had sexual content during every single meeting they had. And he took photos every single time. While he hid their relationship from others, he explained it by saying that she was very mature for her age. It was false. It was because she was a child that he never told anyone. He used her innocence to do whatever he wanted with her. Not just sexually, but also psychologically. He manipulated her for his own reasons, for his own pleasure. He was calculated and methodical in the way he tricked her into a relationship and the way he calculated her for over a decade of her life. Even today, she still has trouble identifying the line between a normal and an abusive relationship.
That's really sad.
Even the times with him that could have been perceived as smooth and conflict free were still abusive. She wanted to become good at figuring out how to stay in his graces by pleasing him and doing exactly what he wanted her to do. And she did. She became the best. He had made himself her only lifeline. And she wasn't going to mess with that. Survival is instinctive. And it comes out even in the most twisted of circumstances. He controlled every aspect of her life. When she was 17, he directed her to overstay her visa. At the time, she was too young to understand what that meant and why he wanted that to happen. It was because he wanted to use her status to strip all viable options from her, and in doing so, deprive her of her freedom. She wasn't old enough to understand that he was taking away her rights. She met him when she was just 13. From the start, she didn't really feel comfortable around him. Even trying to be in the same room as him, she would avoid it at all costs. But the adults around her would get upset for being rude and pushed her back towards him. At the time, she felt like this was a violation of what she wanted, and her gut was warning her. It was like her heart was punching her every time she was around him. It was so terrifying. The first time she had to have a conversation with him, she talked about how she had placed second in her spelling bee contest, and she continued to avoid him after that. But in the years later, he told her she was special from the first time they met. He had sex with her for the first time in 2005. He expected her to celebrate their anniversary every single year. At the first time, she was only 15. He was 45. This was a few months of walking in the middle of the night. He would bring up topics of sexual nature, and they would always escalate. He asked explicit questions about her sexual history, of which she had none. Like, she was a virgin. She didn't even know what he was talking about half the time. And he told her to keep it all a secret. Keep it hush hush, he said. He severed her from her friends and her family and made himself her only resource. At the beginning, he would ask her to sneak out of the house and meet in secret, and every single time they would have sex. He would often take her into his library. And during these secret meetings, where she was still 15, he would take pictures of her. The experience of being photographed is seared into her mind, into her soul. Every time she hears a camera click, it brings her back to that moment.
That's so sad.
She holds scars on her body that will never be erased. They carry immense emotional pain. They're a reminder of his cruelty and manipulation. He knew exactly what he was doing, even asking at some point if having his initials on her body would keep her from being with other people. And by having his initials on her, he meant like carving it into her skin.
Oh my god.
And she did. He drew pleasure knowing that he had marked her. She was his. Even when she got a tattoo covering his mark, it wasn't enough. Nothing could disguise pain and shame of that spot on her body. It was in 2017 she left thanks to her sister. When she walked away, she still had the mind of a 15-year-old in the body of a 27-year-old. She missed out on incredibly basic things people learn in their youth. So she was completely unarmed and unable to cope in this new world she found herself in. She was distrustful of almost everyone, including her own family. Sometimes she felt moments that she was unsure if she even should have left or not. She felt completely alone. And because of him, she had no documentation of legal status, even in her home country of Mexico. Because of him, she had no work experience, no education, which will forever limit her. Raniere used other women within the organization to recruit other women for his secretive groups within NXIVM. These women were blackmailed into doing it. Some of them were sexually assaulted, even branded, which we'll get into later. It was a requirement that other women recruited other women into DOS, as they would be punished if they didn't, or if they didn't bring enough people in, they also got punished. They had to seduce Keith as a test of loyalty. This would show if the slaves were willing to push their fears and experience away, and they would just only embrace Raniere, Vanguard. This is how they manipulated them into thinking they were doing this for themselves. And so their own growth turned into dozens upon dozens of sexual encounters with this man. And he wasn't, like, not that I'm saying anything, but like, he was an old man. He was not attractive. Disgusting, absolutely repulsive to even touch him.
Ugh.
Like, old, saggy, wrinkly skin. And he would force these young women to do that. They would have never consented into doing this if they weren't being held basically at gunpoint. Like, their lives were on the lines. Their families' lives were on the lines. They had to do this. It was disgusting. Some of the real and repulsive things this man went on to do. This is where I have to give an intense warning, as I will be discussing CP and rape of young children. Horrifyingly, Raniere claimed that he needed them young. I'll go into more detail on this shortly, but I need to tell you the story of Camilla and her sisters. Raniere was bedding 3 sisters at the same time, including Camilla, who was only 15. He was abusing a child and committing incest with her sisters. It's horrible, but a note to mention, Raniere refused to bathe for 2 years during this time.
Oh.
Yeah. And the
Oh.
sisters during this time weren't the only women Raniere had contact with. The possibilities for spreading and contaminating STDs were enormous because, of course, Raniere, he wouldn't use protection. He wouldn't even clean himself. Why would he use protection? One of the women who worked directly under Raniere said she would be paddled or put in a cage when she failed to comply with his assignments, which were oftentimes just gathering more slaves into DOS.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Masters regularly groomed slaves for sex. Vanguard forced women to have sex with him. And while on assignment, these masters, who were other slaves, committed them to have to be imposed on the low-calorie diets that Raniere enforced because he preferred exceptionally thin women. A DOS member had purchased a metal ankle. She was in shackles, and she had a studded rubber paddle and a collar that was used to shock the person who had to wear it. And she was commanded to go and get these items by Raniere for her any act that she did against him. Raniere took pictures of Miss Salzman, who is one of his inner circle women. He took nude pictures of her, and this is how he was persuading her to have sex with him. She explained that his relationships with other women were to further enhance their personal growth. 15 years old. That's how old Raniere was when he took new photos of her. They were never destroyed. In fact, jurors at Raniere's trial were shown those sexually explicit images
Oh,
That's how he ended up with charges related to CP. A DOS member offered her then 15-year-old daughter to him, which was a different person than previously mentioned. He went on to say that children were pure vessels for him. I'll get into that later, but it's truly disturbing what he talks about vessels and holders for his seed. One of the victims who spoke out anonymity said that she met Raniere in 1990 when she was age 12 and he was 30. He offered to tutor the girl whose mother worked for CBI, which was a multi-level marketing and MLM company that he worked for because he had one before he worked at NXIVM. The young girl was hired to walk their dog, and he encouraged her to visit their townhouse for tutoring sessions. The woman said that these tutoring sessions were a pretext for their sexual encounters, that she and Raniere had over 60 encounters over the course of months, ending around 1991. So that's over the course of a year. Daniela, who was the sister of Camila, testified at Raniere's trial. Vanguard Raniere claimed that he had mystical powers and he could help people grow spiritually and fix disintegrations through sex. The sisters were strongly discouraged from discussing their sexual relationships between each other. So they didn't want to know what was happening to the other sister or vice versa. They were also coached to refuse any questions about paternity regarding his abuse to a nurse who might have been a reporter. Because remember, he got them pregnant and he
yeah.
forced them to get abortions, possibly and allegedly multiple times. Beginning in 2010, Daniela was confined to a bedroom for 2 years in her family home on the pretext that she had stolen money, which allegedly was not true. Daniela maintained her captivity for years, and it was really just because she told Raniere that she had romantic feelings for another man. Vanguard accused her of an ethical breach and assigned Salzman, a woman in his inner circle, to help her learn from her mistakes. Daniela was locked in this room. The windows were completely blackened out. The only thing she had in this room was a mattress, a pen, and paper. She was only allowed to speak to Salzman. Other family members in the house were supposed to shun her, and they did. She's given a pen and a piece of paper so that she could write to Raniere, and she did. She wrote endless letters begging for forgiveness, begging to let her out. She said that Raniere was the only one she ever thought of. Vanguard, oh my gosh, he is a god. He is a god incarnate, but he never read a single letter. He oftentimes just told them to throw it out. He didn't want to hear anything she had to say. Her confinement ended in 2012 after she almost attempted to self-exit. But instead, she was escorted out of NXIVM and left at the U.S. to Mexico border with less than $80 and no documents whatsoever. Just left there. As a side note, the letters, Vanguard often describe them as just tantrums. She's just having a tantrum. So Camilla met Raniere when she was 13 and had the sexual relationship with Raniere that we talked about a little bit. It lasted for 12 years. It continued into adulthood, and he made her have an eating disorder and do self-harm. And she also attempted to self-exit. She lived alone in a condo that he rented for her. And one day, perhaps out of loneliness, she fell in love and she had an affair with a guy named Robbie, who was in his early 20s. She was also in her 20s too. Like, it seemed perfect. This guy wasn't like 50, 60 years old. And he seemed like he genuinely cared. Like, he was the son of one of the top NXIVM leaders. Like, he knew everything that she was going through and they could just relate to each other. But this ruined everything. She was no longer pure. Robbie's semen had touched her and affected the purity and destroyed the perfection of Vanguard's exquisite DNA. This is how they described it. All was lost. She oftentimes was suicidal at this point. She developed bulimia, probably out of the enormous pressure to always lose weight. But the generous Vanguard was always considerate, always forgiving, found a way out for her. She could be redeemed for her transgression of being with Robbie and give up on all plans of having a family with him and become his slave. Plus, she just had to do this one tiny little thing, which was find other slaves for him to have sex with and to give up the idea of being his number one because obviously Vanguard was super faithful to her. He required her to find another virgin to replace her with. And she felt guilty because Keith was dying. Vanguard was dying. He was lavishing over what she did with Robbie. And as a result, that was his extermination. His great gift to humanity was through his perfect semen, unless she finds another virgin. Poor Vanguard. He was getting too old to start with a new 15-year-old virgin, as she was just 10 years before. All seemed lost, really. So she did her best. She was going to find him a new slave so that his greatness, his lineage, his DNA would never die out. We always need a Vanguard. It's the best. I'm going to read you a little bit of verbatim their text, which was also read in court. Keith said, I don't know if it's possible now, but it needs another pure vessel, a virgin, that I prepare. And that doesn't fail by having sex with another man. I don't know if I have it in me to repair with another. With that pure vessel, we might be able to do it. Camilla said, okay, I'm looking, love, he said. I'm running out of time. And the potential ones are so young. It would take a rare one, indeed, to transcend the societal norms and relate with someone so older in the way that is permanent. Besides, I'm a donkey, a man with a large penis. And that really gets in the way, he said. So
Wow.
he went on to say regarding her bulimia that it hurts him and that he needed her to lose weight. But he also needed to have sex with her or his life force would wane. But her vomiting food turns him off. I'm going to read you another text verbatim just so it shows how he would manipulate his victims. Because it'll hurt me physically and set me back if I'm to be intimate with you in the next 2 to 3 days because of bulimia. My condition is very tenuous, meaning he might not live. It was also hurt me physically and set me back not to be intimate with you in the next 2 to 3 days, meaning he would suffer because her bulimia was the problem. You would have to have the capacity to help me. I don't know which pain I should take or can bear, he went on to say. I told you B is bad for me and us, but the weight, her being too heavy, is worse than her having bulimia. Also, I thought you got that. What about Lauralis? Which was one of his inner circle's underage daughter who
Okay.
Keith wanted to be her successor.
Mhm.
Camilla said, no. Keith, why? Camilla said, I'm secretly hurt that for years you said you would help me get through this, and now you're abandoning me for the daughter. She said, I feel so unloved, and misunderstood. During their 12-year relationship, Camilla said that Vanguard expected her to be available for sex at all hours. He ordered her to weigh less than 100 pounds and get an abortion. She attempted to self-exit more than once. As a side note, after all the victim impact statements in court, Raniere's lawyer, Mr. Alfagano, argued that his client never intended on hurting any of the women. He just said he was in love with them and simply had trouble dealing with breakups.
Oh, he's in love with children? Like,
In a stunning moment, The judge interrupted him in the middle of his speech, yelling no during a back and forth in which the two men shouted through face masks. So they were
Oh,
loud. The
oh
judge spoke
God.
forcefully about how intent did not matter when a 45-year-old man sexually abuses a child. During one of his seminars, Vanguard said, "Let's talk about really gross things. Raping children, raping a baby.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine what it would be like raping children? Raping a baby? Even if it's just primitive, someone who is just out of the body, it's like it's not just a baby. It's something that feels good.
What the fuck?
What if it was a lump of flesh? I'm going to be really crude, but oh, it feels really good to stick my dick in a steak.
What the
Oh, it feels really good. Oh, it's a baby. That's what it feels like. That's how this man justified the rape of minors to his followers. And on some level, this really feels like a confession. If it's a baby or not, it's alleged that this is what he was feeling when he was raping children. He said this in a room full of people, by the way. He was on stage. It was
fucking
accepted by the members because it wasn't the first crazy and gross idea that he introduced. It was the 100th. It was part of an advanced training day for longtime members who already had a ton of buy in, and he slipped it in as part of an all day workshop. It was just 1 minute of hours of Vanguard who ranting. It was insidious because he presented it as a thought experiment on human impulses, but really it was his own vile desires. Also of note, people were uncomfortable with this.
Oh yeah.
And if they voice that discomfort, though, the curriculum in these courses instigated gaslighting and victim blaming by suggesting the problem was rooted in the subject, the person who was pointing this out. They did a lot of answering questions with questions. So someone would say, "Oh, this baby raping stuff is gross." And someone would say, "What do you mean? What do you think makes you think that way? I think you should really work on that."
Oh yeah, they would try and like twist it on you saying that you're fucked up.
Not to mention, these members were also sleep deprived, food deprived, and followed a rigorous daily routine that left no room for freedom of thought or the ability to critically think. I'm going to get in a little bit into the secret societies now. Um, so, DOS, I mentioned at the beginning of this video. They recruited over 100 innocent women who were in the US, Mexico, and Canada under false pretenses. The leaders often concealed the fact that Vanguard was leading DOS, and they gathered collateral consisting of highly incriminating materials um, that they would blackmail these slaves into submission, innocent women. DOS was an acronym that stood for Dominus Obstinctus Suratum, which basically stands for Dominion over a sorority of women. DOS operated similar to an MLM with levels of women slaves being headed by masters who were also slaves. These women were expected to recruit slaves of their own, and that would make them masters of these slaves.
Wait, can I ask a question?
Mhm.
How did they like find these women?
Um, a lot of these people who were in the cult were celebrities or people with power.
Oh,
So, like, it
yeah.
wasn't just like, you know, regular people
Okay.
who shop at Walmart. Like, it was like high
Okay, yeah,
people,
that makes sense. Like,
celebrities.
yeah, like people with power. Okay.
Yeah. Not saying that, people like you or I don't have power, but it was just,
No, but like there's more like initiative when there's someone with like a social status.
yeah.
Okay.
So these slaves had to, well, they didn't have to. They owed service to their masters, but not only to their masters above them, and so on and so forth in this whole period, with Vanguard on the very top. And estimated at the end of it, they estimate that 150 women were in DOS. So it's between 100 and 150. So it was elite, right? Because there were 16,000 people in NXIVM. But Raniere was the only male in DOS, and he sat on top of the pyramid. As part of the initiation, women were branded near their pelvic bone with Raniere and Allison Mack's initials. Now, it's alleged that it's just Vanguard or Raniere's initials, but some sources also say that it's Allison Mack, who was one of his inner circle of women. Surgical masks were distributed when they were holding these women down to help with the scent of burning flesh. During Raniere's trial, his lawyers said that the DOS was a strong medicine that wasn't really for everyone. Vanguard encouraged DOS masters to use demeaning and derogatory language and racial slurs to humiliate their slaves. It's important to note that Raniere was also racist himself, which should come as no surprise
Yeah.
from a case like this. Members were subject to corporal punishment, which included being forced to hold painful poses. So, like, like the yoga pose, snake, where you have to kind of wrap your arms around and your feet around and sit down. I'm going to
Yeah.
pull up some graphics on the screen now. But this is kind of like what they used in torture. That's exactly what they had to do for hours. They had to stand barefoot in the snow, take cold showers, whip each other with a strap. And also, their extreme diets were painful. Their hair would fall out. These slaves were also ordered to remain celibate and stop removing their pubic hair as well.
Oh.
Most of the slaves were told that their brand stood for the elements. Only Vanguard's inner circle members of women knew that the brand was initials. The branding ritual, because there was a ritual for it, was a script created by Vanguard. These slaves were fully required to be naked during them. These ceremonies were filmed and used as more collateral for the slaves. And in a recorded conversation between Vanguard and Allison Mack discussing the branding, Vanguard said, "The person should probably ask to be branded. They should say that before they're held down, so it doesn't seem like they're being coerced." He went on to say each of the strokes, like when they're burning into your skin, should have a line that is so like, "Thank you," and then the person being branded would have to repeat that.
What if
Yeah. He tasked Allison Mack and the other women within his circle to finalize his plans of branding and branding ceremonies. In some cases, the women would pass out from the pain, but in others, it was described as being so painful, it was as bad as childbirth, if not worse. So, yeah, they definitely didn't have any painkillers or anything. The idea of strapping women to the table came from Vanguard. It would be an act of submission, he said. That would further enforce DOS's ideas. He also said that the brand should have to be done in an orderly fashion, saying for each of the 7 strokes of his initials, there should be some element of ritualization. For the scarring process, even though they would be strapped down, there would have to be people holding them down because it was so painful. There would be 3, 4, 5 people, women, slaves, holding the person down while they were being filmed. It wasn't just a brand. They carved it in line by line. When they weren't being forced to be branded or starved or being stuck in positions, the women would have to remove their clothes and array themselves in the floor in front of Vanguard while he sat in a chair and spoke to them about philosophy, and other topics. If he wasn't in attendance, they would post in a big group photo, and send it to him, making sure the parts of their body that had been branded were visible. He said, "When we feel pain, it shows us how much we can love."
Oh my god.
That's wholesome.
The gaslighting is insane.
It's important to note that DOS members communicated using encrypted phone applications like Telegram or Signal. So with Telegram, and I don't know that much about Signal, but with Telegram, it's called blow up the chat. So as soon as you leave a chat room and everyone leaves this chat room, the chat room's gone forever. Like there's no way to get it back. Telegram is super strict with their rules about privacy, and they protect their users. So in this case, some of those Telegram conversations will never be known what was said to each other. Oftentimes, the identities within DOS were not always known to others. They were encouraged to recruit people with power and influence across the country. He definitely had a manifesto, like kind of like a little Bible that he would carry around that kind of enforced the master slave relationships. Excerpt from his book included: "The best slave derives the highest pleasure from being her master's ultimate tool, and your sole highest desire must be to further your master, for whom all good things are related."
Wow.
One stratagem favored by Vanguard was to tell his female disciples within his inner circle that they had been high ranking Nazis in their former lives, and that having yogic sex with him was the only way to shift the residual bad that was lurking in their systems. Eventually, he retired this Nazi story. Perhaps there were limits to how many people could be incarnate SS officers, and he replaced this narrative to simulate self-loathing. He told women that the privileges of their gender weakened them, and he turned them into prideful little princesses. And in order to be freed from their prison of femininity, they needed to submit to this program of discipline and suffering because they were entitled, remember? That became the sales spiel for DOS. One of the people involved in DOS, Sarah Edmondson, who is best known as her starring role in Stargate, was a devout member of the cult from 2005 to 2017. She was as deep as it gets. She brought in over 2,000 new members into NXIVM and started her own branch in Vancouver. She was in DOS. Another woman was forced to sleep on the floor for several days to serve penance to her husband for some supposed offense against him. She also revealed that there were discussions about her weight and odd tests she was asked to perform, such as licking a puddle off the ground. India Oxenberg said that she was expected by Vanguard to wait naked for him like a piece of meat. She became so thin under his manipulation, she stopped getting her period. Some of the women testified that they thought joining this women's mentorship group was to be a wholesome experience, right? Like it's women for women, but they were only directed to have sex with Raniere. These women were broken, but how did they get there? Another secret society Raniere had was a little thing called SOP, Society of Protectors. Essentially, it was a man's movement. The idea was similar to DOS and the JNS movement, which was another movement that I'm not going to get into. This was a men's movement to help build character, honor, nobility, gentlemen. In essence, it was to help toughen little boys into men. Leaders of this group were called the High Council, and this is a group that's allegedly still running. In SOP, there were these things called readiness drills, and there were two kinds. There was a readiness drill to see, are you ready? It's 3 p.m. Ding! A message would be sent. It read, ready, and that would go on to the leaders and their people and their people's people and people all over the world. And the idea was that everyone had to report back saying they were ready, to see how long it would take, to see what network would fail, to see how responsive you could be. Another kind of readiness drill was called randomness ready or sea level readiness. In essence, you were to stand by 7 days a week, 24 hours of the day, you were on call. It's basically like you were waiting for an air raid siren to go off. You were that on edge. The bomb would be dropping at any time. This could happen day or night, and it was a scramble to reach everybody and find the people who weren't responsive. How did a member become a member of SOP? Well, you had to take a weekend course and then be a paying subscriber, like a paying member in good standing. You would pay $50 a month, the membership, and that's it. You're qualified.
Wow.
Yeah.
$50.
Yeah. Oh, but there were other fees. Weekends with the founder were typically more expensive, around $1,000 or higher. The SOP members had to provide collateral as well, which normally included sums of money as high as 1,500. And if they did what they were supposed to, they got the money back. The idea behind SOP was that women lacked discipline. And the issue that most men had was that they never really grew up into men. They were boys still. And they needed to grow up fast. So you're basically being teased by all the other older boys. And you're getting teased, pushed until you finally man up and you stop crying. That was the whole idea. You needed to sit straight up. No bend, no slouching. If you're not sitting straight up, there would be consequences. Anything from you get singled out to you'd have to do planks for a minute, 2 minutes, an hour. So, much like the army, when one person screws up, everyone screws up. There were men and women eventually in SOP. Initially, it was just a boys' society, but women were eventually invited too. Everyone had degrading mantras that they had to repeat on end. Things like, I'm never good enough, or I'm an entitled POS, I don't deserve to live, things like that. They also had BS sessions, BS standing for bullshit, and they were held with men first, like I mentioned, but eventually women as well. And basically, you came to this group, and there were people who would call you up on your BS. In other words, you would try to understand this thing that you're complaining about. So you would be the problem. You got assaulted. That's your fault. Get over it. Stop complaining. So the idea would be that SOP leaders, the High Council, would walk around observing people sitting. Are they straight up? Are they standing out? Is someone kissing ass too much? Well, they have to be singled out for that. Are they prideful? Are they defiant? Are they asking too many questions? Oh, well, then they need to be punished. The whole idea was that women had to learn, and you're going to be wrong no matter what. So keep taking the hits until you grow up and stop being a baby. The punishments were things like holding wall sits, holding weights up, holding planks for long periods of time, or humiliating someone into wearing angel fairy wings and calling them a princess, or wearing a jock strap for public humiliation. People would get wooden stakes. And if a person was seen as particularly aggressive, i.e., they were asking too many questions, they would have to hold up this wooden stake and they would have horrible things written on them, or they would just be singled out. You would have to also wear name tags so everyone knew your name and everyone could call you out on your BS. And then they went on to discussing women and how they were entitled. So remember in the beginning that I mentioned they would take pictures and compare women to cows?
Yes.
Well, they reviewed a lot of videos. In the first trainings of SOP, like when you would first begin going to SOP,
Mhm.
Vanguard would suggest that you should always be taking pictures of women and addressing them in a certain way. Like, oh, let's make a video of them to reveal what they're doing. Or if a person was very prideful, you should make a video and show them their pride, show it to everyone and embarrass them, show them naked, show them in degrading positions. Yeah, that'll embarrass them. And the theory was that they'll have a sense of, oh, God, that's how I was behaving. Oh my gosh. I'm so prideful. Esther stood up. She had an issue. This wasn't right. But Vanguard, who was in front of the room at the time, talked her down. She's pretty quiet after that. In fact, she didn't really talk to anyone after that. There were other times where some of the women expressed to the high society, the leaders of SOP, their concerns. And sometimes they would express that to Vanguard, but he would always respond in a way that made them think, oh, you know what? I probably shouldn't mention this to him anymore. It started out how men should protect women, how they were noble and gentlemen, like, and then it became a class into how to break women down to become perfect DOS members. Most of the women who took this class became first in line masters at DOS. The basics Raniere taught them was that men are polyamorous
Oh
and
my god.
women were monogamous. Women needed men to save them. These men were convinced that they should have multiple partners. What's wrong with that? If you ejaculate on their face, they understood. They're your property now. That was
Wow.
said in one of the lessons. Women over time just became shells of themselves. They almost looked like they were beaten into submission. Their eyes were gray and hollow. Yeah. What's even more shocking is that Vanguard continues to allegedly lead DOS from prison as well as
Are you
um,
serious?
POS. Yeah.
Oh my
It's alleged. While SOP is still alive and well, it's alleged that the members have gone underground and they're still trying to find recruits. So, a little bit about Raniere. He was born in 1960 in New York. He was the only child, of course, of James, who's an advertising exclusive, and Vera, who is a ballroom dancer. His parents separated when he was 8, but that didn't stop him from thriving. A conversation with his father said they told Keith pretty much every day how gifted and intelligent he was. And it was almost like a switch went off in him. Suddenly, overnight, Raniere became like Jesus. Like he thought he was superior and better than everyone else. He was a god. And that was something so dramatic and profound. It went right to his head.
Of course.
hmm His mother went on to report that dozens of young girls would be calling the house. This was probably when he was in college. And Raniere would tell every single girl the same thing: I love you. You're the special one. You're important. You're the only one in my life. And I love you. And Vera said, he's saying this to all the girls. He's clearly lying. You're not special. So, like I mentioned, he barely passed university.
Yeah.
But he was crowned by Guinness World Records the smartest man because apparently he had a 2.2 or he had a 226 IQ. Yeah, sure.
Did
I
they
believe
not like check that? Like
it. Yeah. So throughout the 1980s, he was involved with a multi level marketing company, Elmway. In the 1960s, he founded his own MLM company of his own, Consumers Buyline, which we mentioned earlier, which was a buying club that offered multiple different discounts in exchange for recruitment. This is also where he started to form his first harm. But in 1993, that's where it started to decline. They launched investigations and they found that it was a pyramid scheme, which they filed a lawsuit and they won. In 1994, he created a national health network, which was a MLM of vitamins. And the thing about the States is vitamins are not regulated, it's whatever crap they throw in a bottle.
Wow.
Or at least that's how it was at the time. The business failed after 3 years, and he was permanently banned from promoting, offering, or granting participation in chain distribution schemes. So he couldn't do MLM, but he still did. I don't think Keith has any wisdom on any subject worth hearing. He stole a lot from Scientology to structure NXIVM. He targeted people, especially women, who were going through low points in their life, feeling vulnerable and insecure, and he loved them. We hear a lot about the people he was successfully able to manipulate, but it's important to remember there were still a lot of people who saw through him and were not receptive to his tactics. The hard part about Vanguard's shtick is that he's someone who enjoys hurting people and the people close to you. He's malicious, petty, evil, racist, and a vengeful sociopath who thrills at pain. Yet, a glimmer of that excitement is barely visible on his crusty and wrinkly blank face and his dormant, beady little eyes. He's been a lascivious toddler ever since he was a child who has had too much power and zero accountability. He's stole hundreds of years of lives from his victims and poisoned their existence. This was said from a victim impact statement, and I think that's really important to include
Honest.
because it's so true. He also had a fascination with criminal psychology, so he kind of knows a little bit about how to gamble the system.
Yeah.
He went on in one of his classes to describe the 7 levels of sociopathy. The highest level was the most sadist and most depraved, obviously, which he covered in lavish detail. Giggling, he went on to say, sociopaths can't build the value I do.
Oh, what a weirdo.
So during the fall of NXIVM, there were a lot of negative allegations which were coming out, and they bought the endorsement of the Dalai Lama, the 14th one specifically. They spent almost $2 million on the project. So in 2009, the Dalai Lama himself traveled to Albany to give a talk, and during the event, he presented Vanguard with a white scarf on stage. Side note, this is a symbol of honor and respect. It's used in Tibetan religious ceremonies. It's offered in monasteries, temples. It holds religious and cultural significance. The Dalai Lama also wrote the foreword in his book. And yeah, one of his inner circle members had a sexual relationship with Lama Dohin, the Dalai Lama's gatekeeper, who arranged the appearance, who is a monk who is he's taken an oath of celibacy. So that's
Wow.
interesting, right?
Yeah.
One of Vanguard's lovers, Pam, she had retinal cancer in 2013. At one point, she went into remission. She had a kidney removed, and it seemed like she would survive. That was until he took over her health regime and provided her with this milky white drink. The cancer came back. There's a record of an ambulance taking Pam to St. Peter's Hospital. She died that day. In her last will and testament, it was made out to be Raniere's favor to the tune of $8 million. In her last 3 months of life, Keith kept her on a low calorie diet for 30 years. Her kidneys failed. She got cancer. Interestingly, after death, she was placed into a computer controlling cooling chamber that matched her to liquid nitrogen. That began the human kind of cryogenic storage. And this sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, but
Yeah, I was gonna
allegedly it's
say.
real. Yeah. So she's in cryostasis right now, or at least her body is, where allegedly she's still waiting for the chance to be brought back to life.
What the
Yeah, weird, right?
That's really I can't even finish my sentence because like what the fuck?
Yeah, this fucking case goes deep.
That's
In
crazy.
in 1984, 24-year-old Raniere seduced and statutory raped 15-year-old Gina. after they met in a theater group. When their relationship ended, she introduced her friend to him, who was also 15, who he also raped. When her sister Heidi found him climbing into her bedroom window, she confronted them. He went on to say that she was a Buddhist goddess who was meant to be with him. She dropped out of school and continued her relationship with Raniere, at one time working for him at CBI, which was his MLM. But in October of 2002, at 33 years old, she was found dead. There was a gunshot wound to her head. It was an apparent self exit, but according to sources close to the case, those who knew her said that she had been discussing various methods to self exit with Raniere. And sometimes he would send her pictures of someone self exiting for her to comment on. He always took her to the movies with scenes or themes of self exit. And he would pose the question, is self exiting wrong? Is that the right thing to do sometimes?
Wow.
Allegedly, he started saying these things right after he found out that she had another boyfriend. And he said, she must ascend to the level of goddess by leaving her body. So
Wow.
that's a suspicious death. Kristen Snyder was a 35-year-old environmental consultant, and she traveled to Albany to visit Raniere and other NXIVM leaders. Her mother described her daughter after that conference that she had come home and believed that she was responsible for the shuttle disaster. And she thought that Keith was incredible, just incredible. She signed up for the second course in Anchorage. And on February in 2003, on the 10th day of the second seminar, she began claiming that she was pregnant with Raniere's child, a claim which was corroborated by Claire Brofman, a woman in his inside circle. She was last seen leaving this course. Her vehicle was discovered 2 days later in Alaska, 180 miles away from Anchorage, where they were. The police discovered a note which read, I attended a course called Executive Successions or Executive Success Programs based out of Anchorage and in Albany. I was brainwashed and my emotional center of the brain was killed / turned off. I still have feeling in my external skin, but my internal organs are rotting. I'm so sorry, life. I didn't know I was already dead. May we persist into the future. A separate page added, no need to search for my body. A witness at Raniere's trial testified that after she disappeared, he paid $24,000 to obtain her password to her email. 63-year-old Barbara Jesk died from brain cancer in 2014. She was a business graduate in Michigan State University. She was one of the top recruiters in ESP, which was another MLM company that Raniere had, and became one of his inner circles in NIXVM. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor, but Raniere just said, oh, she had carpal tunnel syndrome. Like, don't be worried about that. Don't seek medical attention for your cancer. She lived with Raniere and 2 other women who are diagnosed with cancer, although both of them lived. A sample of hair from one of the women showed that she had significantly higher levels of carcinogenic heavy metals such as bismuth and barium, which are very, very toxic. Raniere and his co-conspirators used the deceased's identity card and charged over $300,000 in her credit card after she died. In 2009, Raniere claimed, I've had people killed because of my beliefs or because of their beliefs. It's interesting to note in Catherine Oxenberg's book, there's a quick mention of white pills found in Keith's library, although it's not known what these pills could have been. That's just an important little side tangent. Keith sent a letter rehashing unsupported claims that the FBI framed him. This was this year, by the way. The threats still continue for survivors of the cult, as activists are offering rewards for evidence that they already possess, but they say they'll release to the media at an undisclosed point in the future.
Interesting.
During the first couple of weeks of his imprisonment, at his direction, members of the group danced outside of his jail and staged protests. And it was estimated that there was about 50 to 60 people who are still loyal. Even now, his followers are still in the dozens, and a group of them are calling themselves We Are As You about these dance gatherings outside of the prison. They said they're meant to bring joy to those inside, according to their Instagram account.
Wow.
Yeah. More than after a year after his conviction, Raniere was sentenced to life in prison. He still claims innocence. The judge ordered him to pay a $1.75 million fine. And later, he was ordered to pay a total of $3.46 million to 21 victims. His crimes resulted in him serving 120 years in prison. He was found guilty of the sexual exploitation of a child, sex trafficking, and conspiracy to commit forced labor. In the recent months, Raniere has spearheaded a campaign to overturn his conviction, directing his supporters to create a podcast about his case and find errors in his prosecution by setting up a contest for a $25,000 cash prize.
25,000. What a
Yeah.
loser.
Yeah. So some of the women in his inner circle, like I mentioned, we're going to touch base on them. So Nancy Salzman was his basically second in command. If Keith Raniere was the sociopath behind everything, Nancy Salzman was the enforcer. So she provided legitimacy to the group because she technically was a healthcare practitioner, and he exploited this. He used her to maintain control over the group. Nancy was one of the women who broke many young and impressionable women who entered the group. The more questions you asked, the less respect you had for the great mind of Keith Raniere. Too much pride was a disease. One woman, after an intense screaming match, Nancy had carefully leveraged every weakness and vulnerability that she had. She would be documenting them like a therapist would. See, she promoted herself in some background of physiotherapy. She called herself a psychologist, but what she really did have was a practitioner of hypnotism and a neurolinguistic programming. So she was a little nurse. With all these weapons, though, she was able to crush increasingly destabilized psyche of victims, countless victims. She can be quoted as saying, "Oh, you're so wonderful. How can I help you?" "Well, I have this problem with my boyfriend, you see." "Oh, he was having these grandiose ideas and his hours were becoming erratic." And Nancy would sit there and she would listen and she would say, "Oh, you know what? The solution's easy. I can help you. He's a sociopath." And days later, sometimes it wouldn't even take days, the women who came to her for help would have glazed over eyes and they would be indoctrinated in the cult. And it was like, there goes another one for Nancy. She prided herself on breaking these people. She was essential to the existence of NXIVM, but even now, she still seems to have a disregard for the law, including violating her bail conditions at the time and intimidating victims into not writing statements. She also manipulated countless people. Unlike most victims who were young and inexperienced, Salzman was a powerful self-made 44-year-old woman when she met Vanguard. She worked with industry giants such as American Express and Con Edison. She was at the top of her game. She knew how to play, but she willingly chose Raniere to be not only his business partner, but his sexual partner, and she used her credentials and exaggerated her qualifications. She also registered her clients under licensed therapists that she would employ at her own company. So in 2002, a woman was being exploited for forced labor. 13 years before DOS ever existed, she believed that NXIVM would help make the world a better place to live. So she accepted a job at the company as a communication specialist. Salzman was her employer and boss, and ultimately her sponsor and her landlord because she was over on a work visa. She placed immense trust in her, and Salzman promised that she would have a successful and profitable career. They would be able to overcome her personal limitations and raise her self esteem. But in 2008, she tried to self exit. She's a victim of trauma and forced labor with very little to her name. She fulfilled their responsibilities, but she was never really paid that well. She did most of Raniere's writing as well, while he slept and raped women kind of all day, which was unbeknownst really to her until the time of the trial. She was exploited because Salzman controlled her income and her largest expenses, including her rent, which she would raise the rent and lower her pay, crippling her into debt over the period of 13 years, which made her even more dependent on the cult.
Wow.
Yeah. She refused to pay overtime or workers' compensation or insurance, or refused to give her a payment structure, which also allowed Salzman to evade federal taxes. She required that she would be working 24 hours, 24/7. Oftentimes, she would be called in the middle of the night to work. But her response would be that she owed her. And because of her ethical dilemma, she needed to show up. I'm just going to mention her ethical breach against NXIVM and against Vanguard was not weighing 95 pounds.
God.
Mm-hmm. So she was immensely abusive. Every time she entered the room, she was referred to as the prefect as well. So the prefect would enter the room. She was the second most powerful in the organization. They would have to bow to her and thank her as a ritual at every class. Whenever she stood or entered the room, they would have to stand on attention. But she was awful. She used public humiliation, verbal abuse, that she compared them to Lucifer. So she was not only aware of, but actively supported Vanguard's manipulation and grooming of women for their sexual relationships. And she also participated. So, yeah, one woman in 2002, Vanguard began sexually assaulting them. And during the following morning, Salzman saw them and normalized the assault by asking about their time with Vanguard and saying that the traumatized state that they were in was due to his energy. But
Fuck.
they were lucky that he had singled them out. She lied to everyone's face, including that woman, knowing that they would abandon the organization if they knew the truth about the relationship he had with women and children. She concealed crimes and spread rumors. She'd have signed every single one of coaching sessions to enforce enslavement, that she would enforce the 400 to 500 calorie per day. And as a side note, they were also made to have to burn off these calories that they consumed through exercise every single day. One person in their drive home had to stop and weigh in into their underwear. Like they would have to drive to Nancy's house and weigh in how much they weighed every single morning.
Wow.
Yeah. And she held it over everyone. In September of 2021, Nancy was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison.
3.5.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just wait. her sister, Lauren Salzman, who, if you remember at the beginning of the episode, Daniela, who was locked in a room for 2 years,
Yeah.
she was the one who knowingly harbored her and forced her into confinement. She oftentimes would threaten deportation back to Mexico. And yeah, she also helped and asked them to get abortions. She was paramount in providing testimony in Ranieri's trial. But that's not to forget that she also was one of the high-ranking official in DOS, and she had lots of slaves and lots of abuse that happened. It's horrifying to know, but Raniere's lawyers argued that the people who were coerced into this group, which was often through means of blackmail, it was just because they were making adult choices. Lauren was only sentenced to probation. Monica Duran, a Mexican DOS member who's evaded justice and kept a low profile since his arrest, she's very guilty of, or allegedly guilty of, abusing new recruits, lying to them about the supposed symbol that was cauterized onto their pelvis. She was one of the members of his inner circle. Claire Brofman, she was a Seagram Harris. So when I mean she's loaded, she's loaded. She has been a loyal follower of NXIVM since 2000s. She used her impressive wealth and bankroll to fund the group's activities and act as its legal enforcer. In 2009, she pled guilty to concealing and harboring an undocumented immigrant for financial gain and fraudulent use of identification. She recruited women from Mexico to work for a fitness NXIVM affiliated company and submitted documents to hire her with a salary of $3,600 per month in order for her to secure her work visa. In reality, though, what she did was pay the woman $4,000 over the course of a year.
Wow.
That's all she made. And it was even more than that. It took over a year for her to make that much. In response to her asking to be paid a living wage, because who's supposed to survive off of that? Brofman told the woman that she would have to earn her visa by doing more uncompensated work. She admitted to the crimes and forfeited $6 million. She used her incredible wealth as means of intimidation, threat, and exacting revenge on those who challenged NXIVM's dogma. She was sentenced to 81 months in prison. Her case was recently updated with a request for a sentence reduction. For those curious and justifiably nervous, the judge retained his discretion to pass sentence within the bounds of the maximum set by the law. So as of today, her release date is still listed as June 29, 2025. Nikki Klein is another actress known for her role in Battlestar Galactica. Her and Allison Mack, were married one time. Klein was so involved, in fact, that she stayed on as a member for over 10 years and even quit her job to join Raniere full time. She helped indict the cult for criminal activity, allegedly, some sources say, but other sources say it's because of her close connections with the cult that she kind of doxed herself. In 2000, his loyalists, led by Nikki Klein, Mark Elliott, and Edward, did the unthinkable. They started a so-called movement that we talked about called We Are As You. And they went and did their little protest outside of his prison. She doxed victims and continued being right at the top of NXIVM after Keith went to jail. Only a year ago did she say she moved on from the cult. Netizens doubt that she truly left, though. Loretta Garcia is a Mexican citizen that is said to have managed an offshoot of NXIVM, later becoming one of the first in line masters in Vanguard's inner circle. Rosa Junko was a DOS master, reputed keeper of the DOS collateral. She is the daughter of the biggest media tycoon in Mexico. She's also married with 5 children, one of whom was groomed to be Keith's next victim. Remember that 15-year-old that we were talking about?
Yes.
Her and her husband are also involved in SOP, and their 5 children are in Rainbow Cultural Garden program, which is a teaching program for children based on the teachings of Raniere. The Rainbow Garden program does teach that women need to be branded as submissive slaves to grow as people. So that's for children. She was responsible for reviewing, cataloging, storing, and rating um, the effectiveness and legitimacy of each piece of collateral. She kept them in her home in Clifton Park in a vault inside her office. There, at her leisure, she could review and catalog and rate each nude and study each confession to determine whether it was legitimate and how effective it would be in destroying that woman's life. What she did with the collateral in her office is unknown. Her home appears to have been sold last March. It's rumored that a DOS slave took the collateral physically from her home and stashed it somewhere. It appears the collateral went south of the border down the Mexican way. And to this day, it's still missing. Allison Mack, one of NXIVM's top recruiters. The former television actress was known as her role in Smallville. She was one of the most well-known and active members in NXIVM. The perky actress found her claim to fame in Smallville, where viewers fell in love with her bubbly personality and innocent demeanor. She appeared to be an all-American girl with short blonde hair, innocent blue eyes, and a completely unassuming character. She also has a YouTube channel. I think that's still up. A 25-year-old NXIVM member, only identified as Jay, said that Allison Mack told her that she needed to seduce and have sex with Vanguard. It was to get rid of all your sexual abuse trauma. Then, and only then, was she supposed to let him take a nude photo of her. Just normal stuff. Mac was there for a 15-year-old girl who went on to be Raniere's first slave. She allegedly sent images to him constituting the child pornography. Mac, directly or indirectly, required her slaves, including Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2, to engage in sexual activity with Vanguard. In exchange for this, Mac received financial and other benefits from Raniere. Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2 believed that if they did not participate in those activities with Vanguard, their collateral would be released. June 2001, Allison Mack was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Side note, there's a TikTok account called Movers and Shakers, which is a marketing powerhouse founded by Evan Horowitz, and Jeffrey Goldberg, with a list of influential clients, specifically cosmetic companies targeting young women. And they also have a campaign with Elf Cosmetics. They were in NXIVM. And in a statement, they said, one of the founders at least, said that they did not regret their involvement with the cult. In a recent statement, Horowitz and Goldenberg said they didn't feel bad for what happened. They just feel bad about how it ended. Employees allege that in training clips, videos depict actual murders and dismemberment of 5 women. Movie scenes showing gang
Oh
R
my god.
and racially motivated murder of an American male were shown. And it's still going on, apparently. Kathy Russell was the bookkeeper for NXIVM. Her lawyer said that they're pushing the 63-year-old Russell and to make her out to be this criminal, but she's made a complete psychological transformation. Unlike the other defendants, Russell had no money or fame, and she simply lacked the means to escape financially. I believe she just got probation. Danielle Roberts, the woman who was responsible for making the electric current gun, the cauterizing pen, to make the infamous mark, has lost her medical license.
Good.
They went on to say this is considered a severe deviation from the standards of care. In addition to her failure to administer anesthesia or get consent, and not telling the women that the symbol was depicted in Raniere's initials. So, yeah.
Wow.
They wrote in their decision that she looked unfamiliar with the electrocauterizing device and appeared unaware of the danger of using it on the skin. In summary, I have this victim impact statement that really hits home for me. You will never know true love. You have to calculate everything: kindness, compassion, awe, morality, weeping at pure goodness. While I will struggle for the rest of my life with what you have done to my mind and soul, I can feel all those things you cannot. My morality is intrinsically mine. Your emptiness is yours forever and ever. And that was the case of NXIVM. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And we'll see you in the next episode.